And we're back. I'm your host, BKP. Good morning from the office, North Georgia's only live online morning show. And we are joined on the phone this morning with Republican primary candidate for Georgia governor, Secretary of State Brian Kemp. Secretary of State Kemp, how are you this morning?
Doing great. Good morning. Good to be on with you.
Are you out traveling today? Are you on the campaign trail? What's your schedule like this week?
No, it is definitely traveling. Moved from our debate forum in Flowery Branch Saturday night. I left early Monday morning, headed to Southwest Georgia. We had an event there, a really good event last night. Traveling this morning over from Georgetown, Georgia to Americus, where we have another event today, and then I'll be heading back to Atlanta tomorrow. So we're burning the roads up, raising money and asking people for their vote to win this race.
The other night, Saturday night, I was over at Flowery Branch. The other night, I don't know, I have not checked with the other campaigns, but you made a statement that I think you said the only campaign that's visited 159 states. I hope counties. I hope that's how many counties we have in Georgia. But anyhow, you said you were the only one that has visited every county candidate. What is it like when you get in some of the real rural counties in Georgia? What are you seeing out there on the campaign trail?
Well, I am, in fact, the only person that's been to all 159 counties, plus the only person in the race that has run a executive branch agency that has many core functions in government. And we work with all these counties, the county elections officials, registrars, many probate judges, and just like where I was last night and today, people, they're concerned about having access to good quality health care. They have hardly any access to high-speed internet. Actually limits on the amount of data that they can use every day, even if they do have internet services. So, these are huge issues when you think about their kids trying to get educated, career opportunities in the future from an economic development perspective, and even for our farmers having the technology that they need to continue to compete on this world market that we're involved in. And so those are a few of the issues that we're facing.
Well, let me go to this. We talked about Saturday night, and I did not hear several of the other candidates go in this direction like your campaign is going in. Your campaign is being called a populist direction right now. You have a Georgia First, kindly mirrors Trump's America First campaign, Georgia First. And when we talk about Atlanta, not to get into transportation and the infrastructure of Atlanta, but when we talk around Atlanta, you say it's a Georgia distribution hub for Mexican drug cartels. And to me, that makes me nervous. Your public safety reform, discuss that a little bit. We may have lost him. He told me he's traveling, and that if we do lose him, he would call right back because he's in sketchy areas. So we did have a real clear, I think we did lose him, Amanda. And he said he would call right back. So if you get, all right, are you back? Okay, wait just a minute here, folks. We're trying to get the Secretary of State back on the line. He's out campaigning and traveling and today, so he said he was going to be in real bad areas. And hopefully, if something happened, he would call back immediately. We got him back. Are you back with us, Mr. Secretary?
Yeah, my apologies. I had a little bad pocket there.
No, that's okay. You told us that to begin with. Let me go back to this and let me recap. We talked about instead of talking about right now transportation and moving Georgia forward with infrastructure. The public safety reform, when you discussed Saturday night about Georgia distribution hub for Mexican drug cartels and MS-13, talk about your public safety reform that you're out crisscrossing the state with.
Well, it's as the person that chaired the Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee when I was in the legislature in the mid-2000s. I worked with a lot of law enforcement, a lot of prosecutors, and then certainly is the only candidate in the race that has a law enforcement division under their purview, as I do in the Secretary of State's office, with almost 40 in our investigative division. 20 of those are post-certified. I just had worked with a lot of law enforcement, and obviously running for governor, you're part of your job is keeping Georgians safe. And I've been speaking to a lot of state elected officials, local sheriffs, and other people in law enforcement. And not only, it's not just Atlanta. Our whole state has become a distribution hub for the Mexican drug cartel, and gangs are flourishing in Georgia. There is not a week that goes by that you don't read about some sort of gang-related or drug-related shooting, murder, assault. I mean, just these violent crimes, and it's not something that anybody wants to talk about. But when we're the #1 state in the country for business, the last thing we need is a bad reputation of not being a safe place to live. And it's time that somebody did something about that. And that really comes to the whole aspect of my campaign of putting Georgians first ahead of the special interest, the status quo, the politically correct, and those that are here illegally, because Georgians are fed up, with Mexican drug cartel individuals coming into our state, going to even rural communities where there's not enough law enforcement in some areas. And it's not because of, that law enforcement's not doing a good job. They're just, big land area counties. They don't have a lot of law enforcement folks because the populations aren't high, and they're wreaking havoc on distributing drugs that are leading to part of the opioid epidemic and other things that are just, wreaking havoc in our state. And I'm going to be a governor that's going to do something about it, which is why I developed the track and deport plan and the criminal alien database that we're going to create under Kemp administration.
What is that criminal database? You've mentioned that several times. I heard you talk about it Saturday night. Explain a little bit of what the criminal illegal alien database is.
Well, it's going to be a database that can be used by all kind of law enforcement officials, breaking down the silos that exist now between the locals and the state and the feds, being able to actually see who we have here, what are the crimes they're committing, where are they being committed, and all of this type of thing. Because like when you ask the question, how many illegal convicted criminals do we have in our prison system in Georgia, you cannot get an answer to that question. We need to be able to answer that question. That's costing the taxpayers a lot of money. When somebody comes in to, say, a Franklin County north of Athens where I live and creates a drug crime and gets busted, they get bonded out, and then they go back to Mexico or wherever, create a new identity, and the same person goes, say, over to, Haralson County on the west side of Atlanta in a rural county over there and does the same thing and gets arrested again under a new name. And we don't have any way of identifying that person. So this database would do that through names, aliases, pictures of markings, whether they're tattoos, scars, anything that's out there and is available, to create this database where we can all of a sudden have the locals go to one place to check a person that they may arrest, the state be able to do that, and also the feds. I mean, that's one of the big problems that President Trump's report said, is that the feds cannot keep up with the data from the states because there's no good way to track. So we're going to do that in Georgia, and we're working on some other things now to give law enforcement the tools they need also to go after these gangs.
When law enforcement arrest under a Governor Kemp administration, when law enforcement would arrest a suspected illegal, I don't know how to frame this question really, would you be okay with law enforcement running checks to see if they are citizens? Go ahead.
Yes, and what we're going to be doing, instead of the way the law reads now, it says local governments, basically may participate in these type programs. Well,
right,
our
exactly.
legislation, our legislation is going to require them to do that. And these are the kind of things that law enforcement is telling me. I have had a GBI agent tell me about trying to pick up knowing that there's a illegal criminal alien in a penal system, in a city in Georgia, and they go to get that person, and that city is complaining about, we do not do that, in our city. And the GBI guys are like, well, we do. We follow the law at the state level, and we're coming to pick this guy up, and we're going to, get him to ICE and let the process go through, because that's what the law is. So we're not going to give people the opportunity to opt out of this. They're going to be mandated to do it. So it's the right thing to do. And a lot of people will talk about cost. I believe that this will be either revenue neutral or will actually save money, because if we're able to deport these people, get them off the streets, not have to constantly be chasing around, that's going to save resources. If we can deport them and get them out of our country, then that cost goes away. I just really heard a shocking story last night from an individual that is working in one of our penal institutions, a federal institution, and just because of the way the current laws read, that they had to release a prisoner who she said did not need to be released in North Carolina versus being deported, because the country wouldn't take the individual back. And she goes, there is no question in my mind that that person is going to be a repeat offender for a dangerous crime, because he's going to break out of this halfway house he was sent to. So those kind of stories, is somebody that's a father to 3 teenage daughters and a husband, those scare me to death, and I'm going to make sure as governor we're doing everything that we can to protect our families.
Well, let me ask you a question just on that vein, because illegal, we're hearing the president this week very strong on ending DACA and the deal that he says is not going to happen now, border wall, and he won nationally basically on that being maybe one of the top 3 issues that the voters put him in the Oval Office. But let me say, I was listening to you talk about law enforcement, that my words, that a city did not cooperate, so we don't do that. As the powers of the governor, what kind of legislation would you put in place that would, for example, what took place with the Oakland mayor? You said when the Oakland mayor tipped off illegals that ICE was on their way, you actually sent the president a letter saying, hey, send those ICE agents here. We'll be glad to have them. But what exactly, when you say law enforcement go into a city that somebody's incarcerated and they say, hey, we don't participate or whatever, what kind of legislation or what can we do to prevent that from happening and get cooperation among all law enforcement, city officials in Georgia?
Well, first of all, that's just outrageous what happened in Oakland. I don't think very many people think that that's even possible that somebody would do something like that. But under a Kemp administration, and that's really what the criminal illegal alien database and changing the language from may to shall will force the local law enforcement, despite what the city leaders may think in some of these either sanctuary cities or so-called sanctuary cities that may not be determining themselves as a sanctuary city but are actually participating like they are one. The law enforcement would be required under the law to participate. So that'll be one of the changes right there. The other thing is I'll enforce the law and defund cities that are participating in sanctuary cities. I mean, we've got a rule of law in this country. We need to follow it. I think Georgians are fed up with that. We need a governor that's going to put Georgians first, ahead of those that are here illegally. And I just bewildered too that the president ran on the border wall and they still have not funded that. I think most people fully support reforming the legal immigration process, which is why I was the first candidate in the race and really one of the first in Georgia to come out and support Senator David Perdue and Senator Tom Cotton's RAISE Act that would reform the process, end chain migration, make sure that the people that we are allowing to come into the country legally are going to be, good members of our society, contribute to our economy, and not just be a chain to bringing in other family members that are going to be a drain on our society. I think people want to reform that system. They also want to secure our borders. I mean, even Democrats or they at least used to, would always say we need to secure the border. So why not do all of this together? And at the same time, we can reform, government programs that are helping our farmers and others get their crops out of the field by reforming and cutting the red tape out of the, legal guest worker programs that do make sense. And I think it's a perfect time to do all of that. And it's very disappointing that the Democrats in Congress continue to block the border wall funding.
Well, Secretary Kemp, I will tell you, obviously over at Flowery Branch Saturday night, I listened to all 7 candidates, and I went back and listened to the debate again that I recorded. And, out of all the 7 candidates, it's just there on video to see that, you really put a lot of focus on illegal immigration, and MS-13 and drug cartels in your campaign. So that's why I want to focus on that. I do have something else when it comes to the state I want to go over, but I want to know specifically, you said at that debate that you want to do, and you may have touched on this, but I want to zero in on it, supporting our prosecutors, DAs, ADAs, making sure they have the resources. Now, obviously, arresting these individuals, but what specifically prosecutors, DAs, and ADAs resources would you make available? Because I hear that all the time once illegals get picked up from people in law enforcement, also in the judicial system with prosecutors.
Well, I think there's a couple of things here. Number one, not all these judicial circuits, especially in places like where I am today around, Maracus and Georgetown and in rural southwest Georgia, and the same could be said for some of the rural communities that stretch in my area of the state between Athens and Augusta, that are experiencing these drug-related crimes, these cartel-related crimes, and a lot of the prosecutors. There's a couple of things. Number one, they don't have the resources to deal with either the volume of those cases, or they don't have the expertise because they just, they have so many other things going on, and they haven't, been to court and tried to prosecute and go after a lot of these larger drug cartels or the kingpins or what have you. And actually, many times these prosecutors will rely on, somebody that's in a metro area, a DA there, to help them with that prosecution. So I think that's something that we need to look at is, how do we get those resources to other parts of the state to expand from what's happening in the metro area, either from a prosecution standpoint, but also from the law enforcement side, when you think about, the Metro Atlanta Drug Task Force and some of those other things. And then another issue, quite honestly, is continuing to have good attorneys and prosecutors in these circuits. The DAs obviously, I think, have had a concern for years about being able to retain quality assistant district attorneys that are prosecuting and doing much of the work in these circuits. And when people are from a metro county, the circuits are pretty small, but when you get to these rural counties, these DAs are working, sometimes in 3 to 4 or up to 7 counties, so they physically can't go to every county or every place that there's a trial being had. I mean, they've got to rely on their assistant district attorneys, and we've got to make sure that they're on at least a somewhat level playing field when you think about, pay scale and resources for them to be able to prosecute these crimes. And to me, that is one of the core functions of state government, which is why part of my 4-point plan, besides making Georgia #1 for small business, putting Georgians first, and making sure that all areas of our state are having the same opportunities as others, is to do a spending cap that's tied to population and inflation. We budget conservatively. We properly fund the things that we need to in government, like, public safety. And then when we do that, we have money left over in good years like we're in now, and we can do real tax reform. But my point there is that we properly fund the core functions of government, like health care, education, transportation, and certainly to me, public safety is one at the very top, protecting our families, and we need to make sure law enforcement personnel and prosecutors have the resources to do just that.
Well, you know, I will say, Mr. Secretary, we here in rural Georgia do understand judicial districts, okay, circuits,
Yes,
judicial circuits that do encompass several counties, and we're also seeing bigger, higher profile crimes. As much as even drug gang related people in the areas that the district attorneys are having to handle cases like that. So I understand what you're saying there. Let me go to one more thing, and I know you have to go. I told you only 20 minutes, and I know we got cut off. But Saturday night there was a discussion about bipartisan, as a governor, bipartisan. And let me read what you said. And you said, as your nominee, Republican nominee, if you win the primary, as your nominee, I will work hard to get elected in the general election. But as your governor, I'm going to implement what I have told you here tonight. Now, let me ask you, my question is, obviously you're in a conservative 9th district. Obviously your message is very conservative on the platform, what I see, other candidates also, but very conservative on the platform, maybe playing to the base. Are you explaining that if, as the nominee, that you, in the general election, you're going to have to go for the win, but you'll govern like the primary candidate that you were on the stage Saturday night?
Well, I'm going to continue to campaign in the general election just like I have right now, because I actually think that the conservative issues that I have, a majority of Georgians believe in those things. And that was one of the points that I later made in that same statement, was that, you know, there's a lot of Democrats serving in the state that would support an agenda to make Georgia #1 for small business. When you look at our state now, I'm very proud of what Governor Deal's done to get us to be the #1 state in the country for business 5 years in a row. But when you're traveling from some of our larger cities to another one and traveling through the rural parts of the state, and not even some places that are rural, but our small business people are continuing to get squeezed. Their health care costs are going up, if they even have it at all, and their margins continue to go down. And we need a governor that's going to cut regulations and make it easier for small business people. I don't know how anybody, whether they're Republican or Democrat, cannot support a plan to make sure that all areas of our state have the same opportunities as I might have in Athens, like access to high-speed internet, good quality health care, good job opportunities, so their kids don't have to move away, that they can stay in the local community where they grew up if they would like to do that. Where our cities, you know, don't keep bleeding populations where they're going to become insolvent. That is a huge issue in our state. I believe Democrats will support that. I believe the Democrats will support putting Georgians first, ahead of the special interest, the status quo, the politically correct, and those that are here illegally. I mean, if Democrats are going to vote against a plan to create a criminal illegal alien database so that we can go after violent, you know, Mexican drug cartels and gangs like MS-13, then, as I said Saturday night, Republicans are going to be in control for a long time. So my point was, when I become governor, I'm going to do what I have been pledging to people that I would do. That is one reason that I'm running, to put Georgians first. People are tired of politicians making decisions based on what the special interests want, and they're tired of people telling them one thing when they run for office and doing another, or doing nothing when they get in office. So my point in that answer was that when I become governor, I'm going to implement my 4-point plan, just like I told people I would do. And you know what? If I get voted out of office for doing that, then that'll just be the way it is. But I believe politicians that campaign on something and then do what they say will be in good shape when they face re-election.
We appreciate it, Mr. Secretary. Let me close with this. Saturday night, your campaign has put out information. I'm on your email list, calling this a two-man race, saying that your campaign is closing in on Casey Cagle. But Saturday night, you were not the candidate that others on the stage were going after and naming. You didn't get a lot of rebuttal time because they weren't going after you. Why do you feel some of the candidates are positioning for Hunter Hill and Casey and not so much yourself if your campaign feels you're in the second spot?
Well, I think when you have a record like mine and you've done what you say, there's limited things that they can target me on, and certainly others in the race have positions that are not necessarily the case, and I think it opens them up to attacks. But I'm proud of the record that I have as Secretary of State. I'm actually running on that record, the only person in the race to have legislative experience, executive branch experience, and who has been a private sector hard-working small business person for over 30 years. Every single day I've ever served in elected office, including today, I've had to make payroll and deal with government regulations. And I'm proud of that record. I've stood up and done what I told people I would do, standing tall to make sure we have secure elections in Georgia, suing the Obama Justice Department twice to implement our citizenship check and protect our photo ID law, standing up to liberals like Stacey Abrams and her leftist voter groups that are supported by George Soros, and I'm going to continue to do that. And if folks want to discuss my record in that kind of function, I'll be glad to do it. So I would be able to speak it while their targets are going where they may. But I think it's pretty clear that the candidates that are targeting are behind, and they're trying to pick on somebody that may be in front of them to help them move up the ladder, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the person they're picking on is in front of me. So we're fighting to be one of.
Do you have internal data that shows you're closing in on Casey Cagle? I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir. Do you have internal?
No, well, we're all the polling that we're seeing, just the feel that we have on the ground is it is a two-man race. We're working to keep it that way. We want to be I want to be one of the candidates in the runoff when we go to July, and if we do that, we're going to win this race because I've worked the state harder. I've got a bigger, more motivated statewide base. I think a good example of that is that we had, more donors than Casey Cagle did. Now, he's got a lot more money than we do because he's the special interest backed candidate, but we have more donors, and at the end of the day, last time I checked, and being in charge of elections, I know that this is a fact. We count the votes, not the amount of money that somebody gets.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We appreciate you very much, and we look forward to having you on again several more times between now and the election.
That sounds good. Y'all have a great day. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. There's Brian Kemp, Republican candidate for Georgia governor, also currently Secretary of State. We're going to take a brief break. We're going to come back, and when we do, I want to recap a little bit on the 3 interviews I've done in the last 2 days with 3 of the candidates, and then we'll get into discussing a little more on the media bias, as some claim. I'm your host, BKP. Take us to break.